All right, I want to welcome all of you to our PolarTREC informational webinar. This is August 30th, 2017. I am Janet Warburton. I'm the principal investigator for the PolarTREC program, and through this platform, I'm the person that's called ARCIS Staff 2. I'm being accompanied by Judy Fonstach, and she's ARCIS staff at the top. And together we're going to be presenting you a lot of information today in a very general kind of way about the PolarTREC program. As many of you know, we just announced that we are accepting applications from teachers and researchers. So I know that there are some questions related to that, and I hope that this webinar will be informational for you and answer all those questions. Before I get started with the main content of this webinar, I just wanted to let you know how this platform, Adobe Connect, operates. Normally there's a webcam, but today we are not going to be doing a webcam because I wanted to let you see the content as much as possible. You can see there's a list of attendees, and there's an area below for public chat where you can post questions or comments as we go along. This event is being recorded and archived, so we will post the link to the presentation in a couple of days back on the website where many of you registered for this event, and we'll also share it by email to everyone that registered. Many people are just starting to join us, and as we go along, it would be great if you can keep your microphones muted so we don't get any background noise. And we prefer that while we're doing the presentation right now that you post your questions in the chat box, and Judy and I will try to pay attention to those and answer them as we go along. At the end of the presentation, we'll have an opportunity if you want to ask your questions live, and you basically unmute and click on the talk button and ask your question. We'll remind you how that is at the end. Today, like I said at the beginning, I have a lot to cover. I'm going to introduce you to who is ARCIS, what the program, what is PolarTREC, talk about our goals and our objectives. I'm also going to go over some of the benefits. We'll get into a discussion about the application process, whether you're a teacher or a researcher. We'll also talk about what happens if you're selected and what happens if you're not selected. And then I know many of you also submitted questions, and I will answer those at the end as well. Okay. One thing, if you joined us by phone, please mute your phones by *6 to mute them and *6 to unmute them. That way we also don't get background noise. All right, so let's start with who's ARCIS. So Judy and I, who are the ARCIS staff hosting this presentation today, we work for a nonprofit called the Arctic Research Consortium of the United States. ARCIS is an organization that is member-based. Our members are individuals, and it also includes research institutions, native corporations, and companies, as well as universities. So we do a lot of different kinds of work, mostly supporting people that are in Arctic science and helping them get their message out to the public and helping them communicate with one another about what kinds of science is happening in the polar regions. So there's a lot of different things that ARCIS does, and you can learn more about ARCIS on our website at arcis.org. The main office is based in Fairbanks, Alaska. We do have another office in Washington, D.C., where our executive director, Bob Rich, works out of. Again, the website has lots more information and a lot of products and activities that are associated with ARCIS. PolarTREC is a program of ARCIS. It's hosted by ARCIS, and it's funded primarily by the National Science Foundation. Currently, we are pending funding for the 2018-19 year. We're waiting to hear how a proposal went to NSF. But PolarTREC itself, in its current form, has been around since 2004. It's taken on, it has its basic component is to put teachers with researchers in the field, and we've had a lot of different kinds of activities and ways that we've done that over the years, but we have been around for since 2004. The main piece is a research experience where teachers and informal educators go with researchers and participate in these polar research experiences both in the Arctic and the Antarctic. I will talk more about eligibility and the and program components in a little bit. Just to give you an idea of who we all are, there I am up in the top left. Judy's next to me. And then we work with these other people, Ronnie Owens, who does our website, Bob Rich, I mentioned, our executive director. We also have a director of programs, Helen Wiggins, who lives in Alaska, Zeb Polly, who is our systems guy. He lives in Fairbanks, Alaska, and Joed, who works with all of our multimedia. He actually lives in Boston. One thing that's unique about ARCUS is that most of our staff telecommutes from around the United States, and our board of directors is both U.S. and international based. So I'm going to go over the goals and objectives and program elements, and at any point, if you have a question, feel free to type it in below, and Judy will ping me about questions and let me know that something's coming up. So all of this information that I'm presenting is available on our website, the program website, which is PolarTREC.com. And if you go to the ARCUS website, there are links to this program website as well from the ARCUS website. So you can always find this information there. And like I said, we are archiving this, so you can also refresh your memory after I'm all done. Our basic goal is to invigorate polar science education and understanding by bringing educators and polar researchers together. Like I said just a moment ago, we've been around since 2004, and we've done PolarTREC in a variety of different ways, but this basic goal has always been the same. And currently, our objectives are our newer proposal is to improve educators' STEM content knowledge of the polar regions and how they transfer that to the learning settings that they work in. Increase teachers' content knowledge and use of STEM practices with their students to build science science identity, my bad there, to increase students' understanding and engagement of the polar regions and interest in careers that are taking place in the polar regions. And a really big one for us is also to develop these relationships between the researcher and education communities so that even after a field experience is gone on and ended, that either a researcher or an educator feel comfortable about communicating and working with the other communities. Throughout this our website as well as through this presentation, I just want to let you know that we use the word teacher, and it's applying to both classroom teachers, formal educators, as well as informal educators or people in a non-classroom setting. Okay. Our program is looked at, well, basically we break it into 4 major areas of focus. The first one, of course, is the one that most people are familiar with, and that's the field research experience that takes place in the polar region. Another big piece of our program is how that experience and how polar science gets disseminated to other audiences, whether that be students, other professionals, or the general public. Another big piece of our program is sustaining or keeping that group of participants together, both as an alumni network and just also keeping you connected to the Polar region group of people. And so we have some tools and activities in place to help sustain that learning community. Another element that's really big in our program is how you evaluate and measure success of the experience and all the activities that we're doing. Are we doing what we say we want to do? And, okay. Like I said, all this is on the internet as well, so you can look at those, and there's more details on the internet as well. Some of the main activities that we do that are associated with those 4 components that we will talk about today a little bit, and I know some of you read about them. We have a 1-week orientation for all the educators that get selected. It is focused on technology training, how to use our tools so that people, you can convey the experience to the broader audiences when you're out in the field. It's training centered around how you use this experience before, during, and after you go out into the field, as well as it also incorporates some polar science, safety, and of course it's also a team building exercise. Another key program activity that we have that's different from a lot of other research experience programs is that we have a really intense, comprehensive selection process that I'll go over. Researchers make the final selections of teachers or educators that are on their expeditions, and I'll go over that. We have some really great partnerships with logistics providers, and you are supported in the logistics if you are a teacher participant. We cover a lot of expenses that are associated with going out in the field for the teacher participant. There's alumni that are involved, both researchers and teachers that have been in the program before. We have some funding to support a researcher or a teacher in the program before or after their actual field experience. And we also have try to make sure that we keep everyone connected to resources and ongoing support long after the program or long after that field experience has taken place. This is just a real quick timeline of our program activities, and it's, of course, subject to change, and also it's subject to funding from the National Science Foundation. But what typically happens is that you can, people apply in September of the previous year. So if you get selected, you would be applying in September. And then we would notify all the applicants in December of their status. And in January, wrong, there you go, she's trying to point the arrow. And in January, we start doing activities to start getting research teams prepared for having a teacher. So there's webinars that are associated with it, and then we have a orientation. This year it's going to be in March 2018, I guess next year. And then usually we start doing logistics planning in April of that year for Arctic expeditions or expeditions that are taking place in the Arctic. And then there's a bunch of stars that happen over the summertime of the year, and those are different activities associated with that particular group of teachers that might be going to the Arctic or to the Antarctic, as well as the research team. Arctic expeditions typically end in August or September, and then we start working with Antarctica teams at the same time and start doing webinars and prep work for that group. Antarctic expeditions can start as early as October and go all the way until February or March of the following year. So way over there you can see 2019, we'd still be working with teachers and research teams that we selected in December of this year. We try to wrap everything up in late spring, early summer of the following year, so 2019. And our evaluation and things like that and reports to NSF, if we're funded, are usually due around July of that year. So it's a long time, and we'll talk a little bit about expectations and time commitments coming up, but just kind of give you an overview of how things take shape. So out of those elements that I talked about before, the teacher research experience is obviously the core activity, and everything else is built around that. This is just a preview of what that looks like, and of course it varies, and it could vary depending on if we're funded and what other elements of our proposal we submitted that NSF approved. So these are just kind of the basic ideas behind each of these components, and they have yet to still be determined. So your matched educators are matched with the researchers, and you travel to the polar regions. That's the basics. Well, experiences go from anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. There have been expeditions that have been longer, 8 weeks, particularly on ship-based cruises. However, it's rare, and we do. We'll talk about how that applies in the selection process. We want teachers to become members of the team and be trained in safety, as well as how you're going to use this experience in your classroom, and or if you're an informal educator with the publics that you work with. And we expect and try to make it so that when you're out in the field, teachers are communicating with the public on a regular basis. This is just a preview of where some of these expeditions have taken place over the years, and it's everywhere. We go to not just the U.S. Researchers, polar researchers have expeditions all over the Arctic and Antarctic, obviously, and we work with NSF's logistics providers to verify if these locations are good places for teachers to be placed. But in general, and there's been very few that we haven't put teachers out on. Most of the locations that researchers are working have been okay with to have teachers with them. Another major element of our program is professional development, and so teachers are totally immersed in the experience in order to get scientific content and to try out the latest science equipment. You're working together with the researcher to figure out the best way to connect students and the public to that science. And you can use these experiences if you're a classroom teacher or an informal educator that is concerned about district requirements or NGSS or any other standards. There was a question about dual credit instructor. I think we'll save that one for the end, and also the other one I'll get to about who can apply in a moment. And finally, the other major component we work with is outreach, and we do have a lot of tools and a lot of activities I encourage you, if you're applying to the program, to really explore the website and read journals and from teachers and look at learning resources and just really explore it, because there's a lot of tools and a lot of things available for you to reach out to the public. It's not the end, and as far as that's what we have online isn't the only thing you can use. Of course, beyond what's on the website, there's lots of other activities that teams have been doing to reach out to the public. So think big, think large when you're doing application about how to do outreach. This is list a little bit of that fourth element about our sustained community and support. Like I said, we do have funding to help nurture some ongoing relationships between the teacher and researcher, or at least that's what we put in our proposal. We work with our alumni quite extensively, and we partner teachers that are in the program with alumni so that you have someone to bounce ideas off with, and they're involved in a lot of different ways. There's a big network that we have because of us working with people and teams for so long, and we use that network in a lot of ways and hopefully connect you to that network, primarily through social media, but we also do some other activities at conferences and things where we connect. We have a huge resource database. It's Polar related, and I encourage you to use that. There's constantly items being added to that. Of course, there's our listserv where it's an opportunity and way to share things. And then, like I said, we do have some international connections, primarily with the Association of Early Polar Career Scientists, APEX. I might have gotten that backwards. Association of Polar Early Career Scientists. Anyway, I'll have Judy type it in there. And then we also have another connection with Polar Educators International, PEI. So we try to really help whoever's in the program reach out to those groups. Program benefits. This should be, hopefully, something that you've heard about from other people that have participated, or is kind of intuitive, but this is actually backed by data from our evaluation that we have had these benefits show up as part of the research experience. The teachers do become part of the science team. They have reported that they actually are engaging in science with this and understanding inquiry science. They all have a better understanding. They've been able to transfer their experience to their students and to the public. We've gotten feedback from teachers in this program that this has helped them rejuvenate their teaching profession, and they like being treated as a professional. They have established a good network of educators and science professionals outside of their prior experience. They do gain science content, and they do apply this new knowledge in the classroom. They've gained technology skills that they didn't have before, and we have been cited as being life-changing, increasing teachers' confidence, changing their careers, and advancing their educational opportunities. So it really is all about how you take this experience and what you want to make of it. But for those that have participated in it, it has been had a significant impact in either their teaching career or even and with their students. What researchers get out of this program, so if you're a researcher that's joined us, sometimes this isn't as intuitive, or maybe you're just thinking you just want to have this a teacher join you because you need to address broader impacts or something on your proposal, and that's great. What you will also get, we hope, and again, this is backed by data that we get from our evaluation through the researchers, that Most researchers have been really excited about getting an enthusiastic and hardworking team member. They've been impressed by how easy it is to do outreach that wouldn't have been part of their research project to begin with. They've had personal satisfaction working with educators and contributing to the advancement of STEM education and scientific literacy. They have formed some lasting connections to an education community that they didn't know was there necessarily before. Many researchers also are faculty at universities and or teach other and also teach. And so they have also picked up some tips from teachers that have been in the projects and that they've been working with and learning to share their science better with those students that they work with, as well as with their colleagues, and a lot more also. Okay, so the nitty-gritty. Let's see, let me look at the questions real quick. All right, so yeah, there's been 3 questions that have come up, and for Megan, Julie, and Bhavana, I will get to all of those in a moment. I think you'll see some of those things addressed here. And if not, if I don't catch them in the rest of this presentation, I will for sure add them to the end when I have a bunch of other questions. I had kind of a program overview timeline earlier. This one is more tailored towards the application. And as you can see, we have opened the applications for researchers and teachers. We're going to be convening a selection committee, which I'll go into in a little bit. And then basically, I'll talk about this process, but in the next 4 months, we'll be selecting teachers and research projects and matching everybody up. And with the idea that by late December, we'll have selected everybody. And then in March, I forgot to move the arrow, in March 2018, we will actually have our orientation and then the expedition components start after that. This is just to kind of give you an overview. And of course, this is all depending on funding. All right, so this pertains to some of the questions I saw earlier as well as some questions that came through on the web form. But for 2018 and 19, we are looking for teachers that are U.S. citizens or permanent residents of the United States or its possessions. So if you're in Puerto Rico, you do, and you're a teacher there, you are eligible for this. And if you're if you're a permanent resident of the United States, but teaching in Switzerland like we had last year, and you're a U.S. certified teacher, you do qualify. So even if you're teaching internationally, you're fine. And if you have any questions about eligibility, the best thing is basically to email us, and we can address you those eligibility questions individually. We are, over the years, the teachers, classroom teachers that we've been recruiting to the program has shifted. It used to be a K-12 program. In the last couple of years, it's shifted to grades 6 through 12. So we're just going with middle and high school. So if you think you're a middle school teacher or you're a high school teacher, you can apply. It is not just for science teachers. I know that came up somewhere. Any teacher, classroom teacher, that if you're an art teacher, social studies, if you're a remote or distance teacher, I think somebody asked about being a virtual school teacher. Yes, you can all apply. Again, if you have questions about that, just feel free to email us. We are opening this up more formally to informal science educators. We've had informal educators apply and be selected for PolarTREC in the past, but we're making it broader and we're adding some activities if we're funded to actually better support informal science educators to our program. So if you're an informal science educator and you work with middle or high school students to provide professional development to teachers in those grades, we really want to encourage you to apply. Again, if you have questions about that, feel free to email us. And like I said, any discipline or subject matter is accepted, not just science. For researchers, we are looking for researchers that obviously have science in the polar regions, but our preference, because our funding primarily comes from NSF, is NSF funded and or you're collaborating with an NSF funded project. Again, contact us if you aren't sure about that or if it's not the case, because there are some exceptions to that and we can work with you. Researchers do not need to be a U.S. citizen to apply. However, the final decision about your application will be decided by NSF. And we do work with some research projects that are subpolar. We ask researchers to really just contact us if you're interested in hosting a feature, because there's usually a lot more questions that you're and concerns that you might have. So feel free to email us or call us. Matching. I know this came up in a number of other questions in the web form about how and when we match. So what's going to happen is that in September, the applications will come in. October 2nd at 5 p.m. Alaska time, the application for teachers will close. That period will close. And then we will start reviewing them. We get usually about 200 applications. They're reviewed internally. A selection committee will look at the ones that make it through that first round. They'll look at the second round of about 100. We have a selection committee of alumni and people that have worked with and or know PolarTREC and ARCIS. It's usually teachers, researchers, and support people. They use a rubric, and they discuss all of the applications that are in their group, and they narrow down their group of applications, their subset of applications, to top 10. We usually have about 4 or 5 smaller groups that are part of the selection committee. So the selection committee is divided up into 4 or 5 different groups, and they all get a subset of those 100 applications, review, rank them, and then talk about them. And they all come up with their top 10, and that creates our final pool of teachers that we look at. What happens is teachers that have applied and are in that final pool, we will send out a note to everybody, usually in early November, an email to everyone that's applied, and let you know where you fall, whether you made it to the final round or not. And if you're in the final round, what happens then is we start looking at our research projects, so researchers that have applied to the program, and we start matching your applications on and looking at the questions about your interests, your scientific interests, what you're teaching, and how you've addressed some of your other questions to kind of find out the best match. So like if you're a get seasick, we are not going to be placing you on an expedition in the ocean. Or if you can't go to the Antarctic because of a variety of reasons, we won't send your application to a researcher that's doing work in Antarctica. We'll just put your application with researchers that are in the Arctic, et cetera. So we do all this matching, and then we send researchers that have applied to the program and that are going to get a teacher. We'll send the the set of applications that are most applicable to that project. The researcher and their team will review those applications. Then they tell us their top 3 applicants that they want to interview. Those interviews take place virtually over the internet through a video conferencing system that we have, and Judy and I set all this up. We notify all the applicants about this and before it happens, find out if they're interested in this project, tell you a little bit about the researcher, the timeline, all those kind of details. And then we set up an interview, and then the researcher and research team interview their top 3 choices. Usually after those interviews are conducted is when they select their top pick. We offer that the experience to that top pick, and if they say yes, then they're the matched teacher with that research project. All of that takes place in November and December. And our goal is and we try to do this before Christmas break, but sometimes things seem to drag out. But our goal is by the first of the year, if not sooner, to have all of the projects matched. This year, we will be matching 12 research projects with 12 educators. So that's usually what we're funded for. So that's what we're anticipating if we are funded. So that could change depending on our funding status in the end. But at the start of this, that's our goal at the moment, is 12. And usually it's 6 placements, 6 expeditions in the Arctic and 6 expeditions in the Antarctic that we support per year. Again, that may change. So I know that's a lot to take in, and it is a complicated process, but it works really, really well. I think as an applicant, if you're a teacher applying to the program, I think what you need to know is that we do read your applications very thoroughly, and we take your answers very seriously. And if you don't want to go to Antarctica, your application will not be sent to Antarctica. If you don't want to go to the Arctic, it won't be sent to an Arctic researcher. If you don't want to be involved in a physics type of expedition, even though we don't know all the expeditions right off the bat, we won't send you on a physics expedition or on a boat. So we take all your answers very seriously, and we try to do our best to match you up based on the times that you've given us. And if we have questions along the way or we're confused about something, don't fret. We will ask you for clarification. And again, if you make it to the final round and you're interviewed, we'll have a conversation, and you can ask questions, and we'll tell you more details about the research project. Good question, Kim. The question is, if you make it that far to the final pool where you're getting interviewed, will you only have one interview with that project or possibly several? You can have several. We try to give you more than one opportunity to be matched with a research team. Now, whether a researcher will pick you or not, I don't know, but it has happened both ways where an application has gone to multiple researchers because of the nature of your application and what they're looking for. But in some cases, educators have been picked by more than one researcher. That doesn't happen very often, but if that does happen, it actually is, and if you happen to be their top choice and say those 2 researchers both pick you, then you get to decide as the person which expedition best fits you. That's very rare, but it has happened. Usually, everybody that makes it to the interview stage, it's an interview, and the researchers will discuss with us their choices. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Sorry, I'm reading this question. Okay, Ruth, I'm going to get to your question in a little bit. Susan, I'm looking at yours. So I'm thinking about your question here, Susan, as to how to best address it. So one thing that came up in the webinar questions, and what Susan is kind of pointing to, is that we do not know what types of research projects will be going on for the year before you apply to the program if you're an educator. So what's happening is simultaneously we have researchers applying to the program and we have teachers applying to the program. We're trying to get researchers, so if you're a researcher out there, if you are interested at all in hosting a teacher, we want to actually hear from you sooner rather than later. Please don't wait till the October deadline. We're trying to find out what kinds of research projects are out there and where they're located, and make sure that the logistics providers are going to support your project and an additional person on your project. We've run into some issues with that. So we really want to make sure that we know which research projects or what the possibilities are sooner rather than later. That being said, researchers are applying at the same time a teacher is. So when a teacher is applying to the program, we don't know what you're applying to. You are applying to polar research, whether it be the Arctic or the Antarctic. So Susan, to ask your question, if you are interested in a variety of science, whether it be biology or earth science or glaciology or life science, yeah, you can put that on your application and be really broad like that, or you can be more narrowly focused. It really is up to you. It's professional development for you, so one of the big things is for you to really think about how you use this experience. It's weighed very heavily in the rubric, so it's probably more so than where you want to go or what types of expeditions. Is really how you're going to use this experience. And I know that that's not really specific to your questions. I'd rather have you pick or say what kinds of expedition science you're interested in than be really, really broad if it's not going to be applicable to you, I guess. So it's not really about chances. It's really about how you address it and how you explain it. Okay, sorry. I'm going to, Ruth, again, I'll get to yours in a little bit. And the pre-existing supplement, I'll get to that question in a moment. So let's go to the application form. Again, these are both web forms online. And I think the important thing for both of the web forms is to realize that they don't save answers as you go along. That's a huge thing. So there is a Word document that everyone should download and fill out first, and then use cut and paste into the web form where you can. Some things are pull-down menus, but really fill out the Word forms first on your own, save it on your desktop or wherever, and then use the cut and paste into the web online version, because if you walk away or something happens where you lose that page, your answers will not be saved. That being said, if you submit an application before the deadline, if something like that happens where you accidentally submit it or you decide to change your answers or whatever, you can go back into the web form, start all over, resubmit it with the new information, and what happens in our process is that we take the most current, the latest version of your application. So, and that's a script that we run, so we aren't going through, and you can't email me and say, take version 6, versus version 1. It automatically takes the last version you submitted, whether you're a teacher or a researcher. Both applications are the same. Everything is, especially the teacher application, is short answer and essay questions. The researcher, we are actually asking a lot of very detailed questions. And I want to also say that the researcher app is not being reviewed in the same way that the teacher applications are. Researcher applications are being reviewed internally. by Judy and myself, and we will go back and forth by email asking clarifying questions about your research or application, etc. So research or apps don't go through the selection committee, it's just the teacher ones. For teachers, your questions may require some research and preparation, so that's why it's handy to have the Word form available. For everybody, email addresses are required to complete the applications. Don't navigate away from the page. Let's see, for pre-existing supplements, the pre-existing supplement is for both the researcher and the teacher. If there, on your application, there is a space where you may be, know a teacher that you've wanted to work with, or you may know a researcher, a polar scientist that has asked you to join their field campaign. If you know of an educator or a researcher and you've worked together in the past and you are both hoping to apply to this program and get supported, that's what where this piece comes in. There's a place on the application, and then it will direct you. It will say who they are, their name, and their contact information, and how you know them, maybe. And then it will direct you to this extra form that's pre-existing. And basically, together, you will have to work on this extra piece and tell us why you should be working together and why you should be supportive. If you have questions about the pre-existing supplement, or you've worked with a researcher or a teacher in the past and you want to be supported, feel free to contact Judy and myself. Okay, and I just want to make sure everybody's aware of the deadline. It's educator applications, teacher applications, and including the pre-existing supplement from them is due Monday, October 2nd, 2017 at 5 p.m. Alaska Daylight Time. So just so you know, that does help you, some of you on the East Coast. And researcher apps, that would be our last date that we'd like to get them from you, but we prefer to get those from you earlier if possible. There is a spot about location and where people want to go on in the application for teachers, that's about Arctic or Antarctic or either. You can select either, and then there's a space for adding comments or something there. So feel free to put your comments about location if it's either. But make sure that you can really do either, and we'll get to that in a moment. Application tips: spell, check, and proofread, write thorough, concise answers. There are word limits, in particular for the teacher's applications. Make sure that you heed to those. Also be very clear about how you want to use this experience, both in your personal and professional goals, how you want to share this experience with others, whether it be in your classroom or with the public or in your organization if you're an informal educator. Use examples. Show us how you might have done something in the past and say, yeah, this is what I'm talking about, so that we understand what it is you're talking about or you're thinking. And make sure that you address all the questions thoroughly and completely. Please use the website. There's a lot of information there. We've had over 150 teachers in this program. So please look and see what they've done. If you know of teachers that have been through our program, feel free to reach out to them and ask them some of their ideas. What worked, what didn't work, what did they like, what they didn't like, things like that. Use them as for bouncing ideas up. And another big one is, I know this seems kind of trivial, but make sure that you are getting emails from us and they're going into your inbox. So that we aren't being spammed, and the email addresses that are also in the application that you need to make sure aren't being spammed. Basically, it's my email address, warburn@arcus.org, Judy's address, judy@arcus.org, and anything from info@PolarTREC.com. Please don't misspell PolarTREC Arctic or Antarctic. I can tell you right away that the selection committee will ding you heavily about that. They don't like it. There are a lot of questions where we're going to be saying, what's your experience? And this is a balancing act of showing us your skills, your strengths, your interests, and how you might be part of a team. Yet we want you to be somewhat humble about it. So balance that. You can, please don't, if you've applied before or in the past, please make sure you give us some new variation of your idea. Don't copy and paste from last year's application. It does get noticed. Make sure your answers are thorough. Too short can be can ding you into we need to have a really good idea of what it is you want to do or what you're talking about. And of course make them complete, not incomplete. We do not need and we can't accept any additional documentation, so please don't send it to us. The application, believe it or not, is enough. For Kim, good question about the journaling. We prefer something fresh or new. So there's a question about, we asked teachers to journal as part of the experience on a regular basis. So there's a question in the teacher application about, it's basically a writing sample, and it's focusing on something exciting or something that happened to you and from a day last week. And we would prefer that it's not something that you've written in the past and you're just cutting and pasting and sharing, unless you can somehow incorporate that piece into your writing. It should be something new, something fresh, something that really did happen last week. Realize that there's people from the selection committee is very broad, and you know, sometimes we get journals that are a little too personal, so don't make it your diary either. I mean, we do want to hear of things that happen to you, but we really have had some that are pretty traumatic and dramatic and very personal. And I guess if you feel comfortable sharing that with 50 people, that's okay, but I'd prefer that you just wrote something. It's just how you would write to the general public if you were doing a journal out in the field. That's what we're trying to get. So that kind of goes to this personal journal or scientific. It's a balance of those. So to give you an idea, I mean, basically we want something that would go to a general lay audience. I think that's how it's phrased also on the application. So if you would normally write a journal about your dog dying and you want everybody to hear about it, fine, write about that. Otherwise, or my approach would be more towards something science or something, that happened in my classroom and how I conveyed an idea or whatever. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have more questions about any of these things as you're filling out an application, we really are accessible, so please ask questions. Okay, I want to move along here because we're coming up on an hour and I want to get to some of your specific. If you are selected and depending on our funding, basically you can expect that we will be contacting you and talking to you about that 1-week orientation in Fairbanks. That's mandatory. You would be coming to that. We do have travel support. I think this was a question earlier, to go and visit with your research team before and after your field experience. We're also hoping to still be continued funding where we can supply equipment such as a laptop and camera for expeditions. We also have requested support to continue making sure that you have access to outdoor gear, clothing, and equipment needed provided through the logistics providers. And this is all for teachers, I must say, reiterate, this isn't researchers, for you to go and participate in a field experience. If you're a classroom teacher, our request for funding, both in the past and in the present, is to also reimburse your schools for substitute expenses while you're either at any of our trainings, the conferences, or meeting with the research team, and or if your expedition takes place during the school year. If you're not, if you don't need substitute time, we do not offer stipends to those that aren't in a classroom because we pay everything. So, however, we do ask that whether you're a teacher, a classroom teacher, or an informal science educator, that you make sure that you have your administration's authorization before we get too far along. Like if you're in the final pool, that they have approved you to definitely go on leave and take place in this experience. And then we also do cover all the travel expenses related to orientation, the expedition. For the expedition, this is important for the researchers. Funding for a teacher to go on your research project is taken care of by the NSF logistics providers, so it doesn't come out of your research grant. Anyway, those are kind of the questions that we talk to researchers about as well. If you're a selected researcher, here again we do work with the NSF logistics providers to cover all that travel for the educator that's going out in the field with you. And we do a, if the logistics provider can't support some of those expenses, then we pay for it out of our project funding. We do provide the teacher with any equipment, training, support, and infrastructure that they need to communicate from the field or while they're out in the field. And for researchers, there may be some personal or project costs that you incur that we cannot pay for at the moment. And that might be, you may want to come to our orientation. That would be on your own. We can actually cover you to meet your teacher and help with some materials and supplies. But you know, we do that on a case-by-case basis, and it will also depend on our funding for the future. Some costs that teachers may incur that aren't covered or that we don't think will be covered by an award might be personal apparel, medical, insurance and evacuation insurance. If they aren't covered by your insurance, we have up until now been able to reimburse those costs, but I can't guarantee that for the future. We can't cover any personal travel outside of your expedition. We can't reimburse for any salary costs or things that weren't covered by your school or work, other than the substitutes. So you have to have their support in order to participate in that, this experience. And again, you don't get a stipend. Very quickly, time commitment. There's basically it goes with that timeline, but it's not an everyday thing. We usually, teachers, we expect you to be part of our program for about 12 to 14 months, just depending on how long it takes teachers to fulfill the requirements, and also when their expedition takes place. And of course, there's times where it's more intense than others, like the one-week orientation that we'll do in March. You know, we expect you to be here. We'll have some webinars. You have the time in the field. There's time that you need to practice and do things on your own. You may need to read up on the science. And then there's also outreach activities that you may decide to do above and beyond what we ask you to do. So anyway, I usually tell teachers 12 months to 14 months that they're with us, and that we're really in a lot of contact with you. And depending on where you are in our program, that time commitment will change. For researchers, it's actually a lot less. We will definitely stay in contact with you for that first year when we're working with the teacher, but your initial time commitment will be reading of applications that are sent to you so that you can pick your teacher, that interview time. We do have some webinars and that we ask researchers to join. Usually they're about an hour long. We also ask researchers to join pre- and post-logistics calls. Of course, there's the time in the field with the teacher and any outreach components that the two of you, the team or the teacher, come up with, you would also be involved with. And then we have some evaluation components. If you didn't get picked very quickly, we encourage you to apply again if the program's available, and certainly follow along on the website and post questions, etc. I think that's intuitive. I'm not going to go into that. Okay, frequently asked questions. These were the questions that came up from the webinar form, and I'll go through them pretty quickly. And don't worry if you have to bug out. Like I said, this will be archived, and you can email us if you have more specific questions. I'm just going to go through all of these questions, and don't feel bad if you have to leave, because I know this took an hour and stuff, but you can refresh or download the archive in a couple of days. So applications, how are the teachers selected? I think I answered that question. Basically, it's through a multi-level process, several rounds of selection. Everybody's application, I can rest assured you, will get read at least 3 times, if not more. How do topics of research impact selection? They don't. You can put whatever your topics and areas of interest are. It doesn't impact your selection at all. Where it impacts you is in matching you if you make it to the final pool. But we do not do any rubrics associated with your research interest. That is not part of the rubric. Do you get to pick the research project, or are you assigned one based on skills and interests? It's the latter. You're assigned or matched with a research project based on what you've put in your application. However, if you make it to the final pool and a researcher wants to interview you, we will ask you whether you are interested in that research project or not. How many areas of interest need to be high in order to create a competitive application? None. Just pick your areas of interest. It's used for matching purposes only, not for moving you through the rubric. Are there any specific fields in which you'd like the teachers to have general specific knowledge of? No. Are there any skills that would be advantageous to be considered as a candidate? No. We just want you to list your skills so that we can best match you with projects. If you don't like to be in the ocean, please list that so we don't put you in with an ocean. If you're afraid of spiders, list that so that we don't match you up with the spider expedition. I'm going to answer Robin's question right now. For references, as an informal educator, are references who know me as an educator, but maybe not be current coworkers, or it's whoever knows you, Robin, that you think could speak to whether you be a good candidate for the project and going out into the field. So it could be coworkers, it could be somebody else that just knows you really well. It's up to you. And we won't contact them till the last stage either, till teachers are being selected for interviews, just so you know, but we do want to have that, have those listed. So if for some reason you need to change it at the end, or you find out you're in a final interview and you want us to contact somebody else, we can do that. Let's see, where was I? Do your teachers generally have any research experience? Actually, that's a really good question, and I didn't bring that up in the application piece, but we do want a variety of teachers in that final pool, so we like teachers that have had no research experience. In fact, we encourage that. If you've never worked with a scientist or you're teaching science, you're a perfect candidate. If you've worked with scientists and are teaching scientists, you can still apply. And you just should be justifying how this experience will enhance your professional development and your teaching. So yes, I guess teachers do not have to have prior research experience to apply. Expeditions, what type of research might we be doing? And I think I addressed that, but we don't know at this point, but most of our projects, we get a lot of earth science-based projects, biology-based projects, oceanographic, a variety. We don't have a lot of social science projects, although I'm working to find social scientists to apply to PolarTREC. What are the dates? It really depends on the expedition. They can go from as short as 3 weeks, which is our minimum, to, like I said at the beginning, as much as 8 weeks. But we will discuss that with you if you make it to the final pool. Requirements, what are expectations of the teachers with regard to your program? Expectations, we do have a list of requirements, and we go over those requirements during the orientation that is required by teachers, and then also during a webinar. But there are a number of expectations of the teacher besides just going to the field. For instance, we do typically require lesson plans being developed, 2 lesson plans being developed, as well as doing some outreach and journaling from the field, etc. So, but we go over those with the teachers, and I believe there's a spot on the website as well that talks about requirements or what they've looked like in the past. And this question about our social studies, world history teachables eligible? Yes. If yes, any tips? Just on applying from this discipline. In the application, just really iterate how you would use this experience and why, how you'd integrate it into those your current teaching and your classes that you teach. Other questions? How many professional development points can be given if selected to partake on a PolarTREC journey? I'm thinking that this might have to do with, I'm not quite sure, but like continuing education, which might go up to another question. Anyway, we can work with you if you need professional development credits, basically. So if you're selected, we can talk to you more in depth about that. But yes, teachers have gotten professional development credits. I know that there was a question earlier about dual credit instructor for 2 years community college. Are you eligible for PolarTREC? This time around, no, we are not accepting applications from community college teachers, just formal classroom teachers, grades 6 through 12, and from informal science educators. What are the dates? I think we already talked about that. And will you be able to access this webinar? Yes, it will be archived. Did I get them all, Judy?
Yes.
Okay.
You got them all.
All right. All right. I think that's it. So Just remember that there is an application deadline. We want to see all your applications. You can submit multiple applications before that deadline. The last application you submit will be the one. Email Judy and myself if you have questions at info@PolarTREC.com. And we wish you all the best of luck.